this week because I'm super excited to hear Traci's. So I'd like to thank Art and Humanities, Salina Public Library, Boy Rock, Alex and James, and Denora. She was so good. Oh my gosh, she's so adorable. Okay, I could not be any more prouder of her and the work that they're doing. Adorable. Okay. I can't read. I have always believed that writing is a craft, not just an art. So if this is so, then Dr. Brimhall is a master craftsman. Not only a PhD, she's also the author of several award-winning collections. I hope I pronounced this right. Sunday. What is it?
Sadaji.
See, I would have never got it. Sadaji. Our Lady of Ruins, selected for the prestigious Bernard Women's Poets Prize, and upcoming, okay, and this is the best title to anything I've ever heard in my entire life. Come the slumberless to the land of I tried that again. Come the slumberless to the land of Nod. All this on top of giving back as an assistant professor at K-State in Manhattan. But we are here to absorb some of that energy for ourselves by marrying everyday imagery with underlining themes of love, passion, death, and transformation. Dr. Brimhall takes us on a fantastic journey through the physical and metaphysical and natural and back again. Her poems left me breathless, and more importantly, made me want nothing more than to go back, read them again, and then go tinker with my own poetry in hopes of improving. In simpler terms, she's such a great poet that it makes me want to be a better one. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Traci Brimhall.
Thank you, Emery. So my son likes to do nonverbal food reviews. So I get a thumbs up if he likes the meal, a side thumb if it's okay, and a thumbs down. I'm not looking for poem reviews. You can just politely clap or politely be quiet. But I'm looking for a sound review. Is it okay in the back? Thumbs up, side thumb, thumb down. I'm only seeing thumbs up, so I'm going to assume that we're doing this okay. So I'm organizing tonight's reading, thinking about origin stories, whether it's the origin of a poem or the origin of me as a writer or the origin of me as a person. I'm trying to tie each of the poems I'm reading tonight back to some sort of origin story. So I'm beginning with the first book I wrote, which is called Rookery. And I really loved being a poet. I think the thing that made me a poet was my undergraduate poetry teacher. I really thought I was going to write novels, but then I just took this class and fell in love with language in this way. And her class was like pretty good, but what was great were her office hours. She would just read poems on these picnic benches outside of the library, and I would just go talk to her and listen to her read poems. And I thought the poems she was reading in her office hours were cooler than some of the ones she was teaching. They were all living poets, and they just made me feel seen by strangers. And I remember the first poem that she read that just, the world opened up, and it was a Sharon Olds poem called For My Daughter, and I just felt less lonely. And so it was one of those poems too where I'm like, I want to write like that. I want to write in a way where a stranger could read it and they'll hopefully like feel something the way I felt something, and they'd feel seen by a stranger. So the first poem I wrote in grad school where I felt like I did it, I'm getting really close. I'm, growing in a way, I'm moving towards something. It was an ode, and an ode is sort of like, an ode means praise, and an elegy means sad. But an ode is a little bit more specific, but kind of like a genre poem that's a song one lover will sing to another before they're parted. So I wrote this ode, and I'm like, I did it! I got close to something, and it was a breakup poem. And so my friend said, now I'm going to make you rewrite this 7 times from different aspects of this experience. I was like, that sounds terrible. Who wants to write 7 versions of their breakup? Turns out I did, and it worked really, really well. She'd give me these really challenging assignments for rewriting into that experience, and it taught me a lot in terms of, as an origin as a writer. It taught me a lot about how to work with my own emotions through language. in search of, there wasn't one right way to write the experience. There were lots of right ways to write the experience. And so I'll start with the first obad, speaking of origins, in the book. And it's called Obad with a Broken Neck. The first night you don't come home, summer rains shake the clematis. I bury the dead moth I found in our bed, scratch up a rutabaga and eat it rough with dirt. The dog finds me and presents between his gentle teeth a twitching nightjar. In her panic, she sings in his mouth. He gives me her pain like a gift, and I take it. I hear the cries of her young, greedy with need, expecting her return. But I don't let her go until I get into the house. I take the auspices. The way she flutters against the wallpaper's moldy roses means all can be lost. How she skims the ceiling means a storm approaches. You should see her in the beginnings of her fear, rushing at the starless window, her body a dart, her body the arrow of longing aimed, as all desperate things are, to crash not into the object of desire, but into the darkness behind it. When this book came out, I attended this really large writers' conference. One of the very first encounters, I had no idea that somebody could have, maybe a middle thumb, that somebody might have heard of me or had read my poems, and so that experience was quite strange, having people come up and having read something I'd written. And one person came up and said, "Who's your family member with mental illness?" And I was like, "Oh my God, why are you asking me that?" Because it's in poems. But it was really unnerving to think you can write to a stranger and be seen or heard by a stranger, but then how unnerving that can be when that person returns and has a follow-up question on something. So this poem is called Echolalia St. Armand's Key. And echolalia, glossolalia is the religious speaking in tongues and having many tongues. Echolalia is something whales do, but it's also when children are sort of making that babble sound before they've started to form language. They're repeating sounds because they hear you making sounds and they're like, cool, this is a thing we do. When children are repeating the sounds they hear others making in an attempt to communicate. And St. Armand's Key is a beach in Florida. Echolalia, St. Armand's Key. When I put my hand in the ocean, I can hear whales call to each other. In the deep, a mother clicks to her calf, and the calf sings its mother's sadness back to her. August singes our shoulders, and you tell me the world is after you again. Another car accident, and more body parts failing. You hold out your arms and ask what you've done to deserve this, why God would hurt his children so. Why don't you see the shark's teeth and starfish at your feet and know that the world will always return? You want me to say you're right, you're being punished, and I am another arrow in your ribs, another flame you can't walk out of. Believers used to be buried in the ocean, you say, tied to stakes in sand, crying out as the waves rose. Families on shore listened to what the condemned asked God for as they died, their wild lamentations and blue dark prayers. The water returns for you when you pull up your feet. The body cannot bear what it used to be. I want to be careful with your weakness, so I sing your psalms back to you. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there, even in the darkness. Praise bone spurs on your spine. Praise the weak alveoli in your lungs, because our suffering is holy and not holy, and all we have. So obviously I was writing very personally about my life, and then at one point I caught myself looking at a photo album. I was like, where's another bad memory I can write about? I was like, that's not sustainable. If I want to write poems for a lifetime, I don't want to court my own sorrow. I don't want to hope for bad things or to keep digging up bad things. If I've said it and put it to rest, then it would be really nice to leave it at rest. But sometimes, right, you're deep in a relationship and you maybe accidentally go on a first date with somebody else. You didn't mean to, you were just trying to hang out. And then you're like, wait, this is a whole other thing. So this one time I took myself on a writing date to an art gallery and saw this piece of art. And I was like, wait, that's not the same book. That's not the same, this is something new. This is the beginning of a new love, a new relationship with language. And so I picked a fight with my obsessions in my first book so I could break up with those poems. And I started following where these other ones would lead. And so the piece of art was a door, but it was a door you couldn't open. It was a carved door where the panels were each carved with scenes of colonialism, and I found it at the top of a stairway in the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus art gallery. And I was like, really, the images were quite arresting, but I was also thinking about it as a door, of like, why carve, a bunch of butchered animals, a decimated landscape, a murdered indigenous population into a door. And I thought about what it would mean to actually use it as a door, and what it would mean to enter rooms and leave rooms, laying your hands on history, and being really responsible to that knowledge. Because I think lots of times we might know something, but not carry that in us in a way that makes us more responsible to that knowledge. The door, there's no door in this poem, but that's what I was looking at when I was like, oh, this is a new thing. I'm thinking about something else now, I'm working on something else. And so this is the poem I wrote after that date with myself at an art gallery. It's called Our Bodies Break Light. We crawl through the tall grass and idle light, our chests against the earth so we can hear the river underground. Our backs carry rotting wood and books that hold no stories of damnation or miracles. One day, as we listen for water, we find a beekeeper, one eye pearled by a cataract, the other cut out by his own hand, so he might know both types of blindness. When we stand in front of him, he says we are prisms breaking light into color. Our right shoulders red, our left hips a wavering indigo. His apiaries are empty except for dead queens, and he sits on his quiet boxes, humming as he licks honey from the bodies of drones. He tells me he smelled my southern skin for miles, says the graveyard is full of dead prophets. To you he presents his arms, tattooed with songs slave catchers whistled as they unleashed the dogs. He lets you see the burns on his chest from the time he set fire to boats and pushed them out to sea. You ask why no one believes in madness anymore, and he tells you stars need a darkness to see themselves by. When you ask about resurrection, he says, how can you doubt, and shows you a deer licking salt from a lynched man's palm. So I realized I was in a sort of like alternate world and writing as a we, and I realized that I think the two literary influences, I did not grow up in a house full of books. My family are not readers. Wasn't when I was a child and still to this day don't read. But I had a Bible and I had comic books. And so my two biggest literary influences, where I get a lot of my language and images from, are the Bible and comics. And I'm still trying to sneak in like all the names of the X-Men into the poems because I just think it's really rad. Because that's where I learned cool words like sinister and colossus and like really great language, actually. And they both have their big moral battles, and that's kind of fun. So I realized imagination was really pleasing to me, and yet I didn't feel permitted to write poems that were deeply imagined. I could only write about things that had happened in my life. So working on this book, my grandmother had always predicted the apocalypse and given me an apocalypse countdown calendar. It was the last Christmas present she ever gave, not a gifted gift giver. So this book, it sort of imagines this like sort of apocalyptic world and a group of women who are wandering through it. But because this is the origin story reading, this one is called The Prelude to the Revolution. So we go to prison windows and pass cigarettes, tangerines, and iodine through the bars. Anything we think could heal a man. Assassins kiss our fingers. Mercenaries sing us songs about unbroken light as we mend their shirts. Bilingual murderers recite lamentations in one tongue and in another young myths. We fold and unfold our shawls, and the men squint into the sunlight, dumb with hope. Some days they confuse the walls of their cage with their skin. Some days the sky. They see their deaths in the sweat darkening our dresses. To sweeten the hours, we share scandals from the city. How curators removed an elephant's heart from the museum because it began beating when anyone in love looked at it. How the coroner found minnows swimming in a drowned girl's lungs. They ask if it's true, if slaves are chained together on ships to prevent suicide. We say they'll never be free. They warn us one night soon the judge will wake to find his bed alive with wasps, while across town the night watchman will stare stunned at the moths circling before he realizes he's on fire. So after that book, so the first book I definitely broke up with. Like, I picked the fights, like I knew the end was coming, I picked the fights to make it end. And for the second book, I wrote most of it while I was living in my car. And then even after I finally ended up in an apartment again with a coffee maker and an electric bill and all those comforts of home, I still wrote about it a little, and then at some point I just couldn't anymore. I just tried to keep writing those poems, but like my clothes were on the lawn, the locks were changed, I didn't know why I couldn't get back in. And so I would write, forgive these romantic metaphors and the sexual one, but I was writing one-night stand poems. I was just like writing poems and then just like, well, that's a thing, well, that's a thing. These other books had felt like loves to me, and I hadn't fallen in love again yet with an idea, with a world, with a set of questions I wanted to keep writing. And then I started thinking about and writing about, my mom is from this small town in Brazil called Puriquiguara, and when I started writing the book, I was like, this book is not about my mom. It's like set where she's from, but it's not about my mom. And initially, there's a missing girl in it, and I had a miscarriage, so I just thought I was writing about this missing girl as my daughter as if she'd lived. And then my mom died when I was in the middle of writing this book that I said was not about her, but set in the place of her childhood. And I realized that that was the question, and that the missing girl is also the childhood I sort of feel like she didn't get in the way that she grew up. So the missing girl in this book is part my mother and part my daughter, because I also, speaking of origins, felt like I lost both ends of a tree, a family tree, at the same time. So the book begins with this poem. The last time I saw my daughter's eyes, they were on the back of a moth's wings. I'm almost ready to give her up for dead. I tried believing she'll appear someday on a boat from downriver, where she's been making a living as a dancer who glues yellow feathers to her breasts and lets tourists eat maracuja from her navel. I tried the easier faith of a gift-bearing God who serves the whim of prayer, but all I got was this ambitious hope, this heart that hangs upside down in my ribs, blind and nocturnal and a glutton for fruit. In a past life, I drowned with a rattlesnake wrapped around my ankle. In another one, I danced for a father's obedience. In this one, I throw a rope over a ceiling beam and let it dangle over my bed. Its abiding creek rocks me to sleep, where John the Baptist comes for me with a basilisk on his shoulders, calls me by my maiden name and says, "You have been weighed and measured and found wanting stilettos and a lipstick named Prima Donna." It's not true, I try to say, but each letter carves itself into a tree and holds its blackness like a mirror. I see myself in every word, only younger. I wake as libidinous and sincere as Caruso in the morning, lamenting his lost horse on a Victrola. The rope above my bed is gone, and John the Baptist's head sits on my chest like a wish seeking entrance to a well. Where is she, I ask, turning his head over in my hands 3 times. He opens his mouth to let down the flood. So then when I was a little bit more aware that I was writing about my mom, I started writing about a dead mother too. It's a really happy book. The book actually is organized backwards, because when I was writing forwards, it just seemed like it was all ending in death. This is also just middle age happening, you know? It's all ending. So the book tells the story backwards in time. My mom came to the States in 1969, so the book sort of starts there, it moves backwards in time, and imagines a family tree that I don't have. So that way it ends in a love story, because I think, thinking of origin stories, hopefully most of us were made in love. It's not always true, right? But ideally, it's a love story that we come from, right? And so that's why the book is sort of told backwards, going backwards in time to imagine these pretend ancestors that, you know, the way love makes us a little foolish might have been one of my origin stories. So this poem has a dead mom in it, since I'm talking about my dead mother so much. It's called What They Found in the Diving Bell. The first time I saw my mother, she'd been dead 14 years, and came as a ghost in the mirror, plucking the hair under her arms and humming a bossa nova. She lotioned her chapped heels and patted her bra as if she were alive in the old way. She said I was born with my cord wrapped around my neck like a rosary, and she knew God, the doomed father of her days, wanted us both. Before midnight, she plaited my hair, hemmed my skirt, sang lullabies she'd learned on the other side of the flood. She lifted her dress to show her bones, shedding light on a stillborn fetus accidentally raptured under her ribs. She said she'd choose her death again, obey any pain heaven gave her. Years ago, she watched a man ride a diving bell to the bottom of the Amazon to face the mysteries God placed there. The chain broke and they pulled him to the surface, smiling, stiff, refusing to open his fists. They broke and unpeeled his fingers. No one wept or fought to hold it. I covered my eyes so I wouldn't see what God, in his innocence, had done. And Emery mentioned my next book is called, and maybe this is worth knowing. So you can pronounce this word saudade. It's a Portuguese word, and it sort of means this impossible longing, often for a place you can't go to, or a person who's gone. And for me, it's both, right? My mom is a person I can't see anymore aside from imagination, and the place of her childhood. Even though I went after she died, I finally went to Brazil and saw the place that she was from. But what I imagined all along was the place of her childhood, which without time machines and whatnot, couldn't get there. So in Brazilian Portuguese, it's pronounced with the j in it, so it's saudade. And so it became the title because I sort of thought it held in it that longing to return to my mother's childhood and perhaps give her one or love her in a way that I felt that she really needed that as a child, that she seemed to not get. And so Emery mentioned the new book, which is called Come the Slumberless to the Land of Nod. So there's this little poem called Winkin', Blinkin' and Nod, in which these boys' bed gets turned into a boat and they sort of go sailing in the stars and catching stars like fish. And so Nod is one of the three boys, and I sort of equate it with lullaby and dream. But also in the Bible, when Cain murders Abel, he's exiled to the land of Nod, that's east of Eden. So before they go, he goes and finds a wife and makes a city. He journeys through exile in the land of Nod. And so I was interested in the fact that Nod could maybe contain this tension of this place of exile and murder for murderers, and also this place of dream for children. Because I was also pregnant with my son when my friend's murder trial was going on. So the book is sort of, I call it Murder Ballads and Lullabies, because I was very interested in this sort of tension of watching this unfold as I was pregnant and thinking about the world I was bringing my son into. And it's really common too, like after, I hear this from lots of new moms, that once you have a kid too, the world, you just feel more porous with the world. The news stories feel a lot more personal, that just, somebody said it's like a crisis of empathy, and I was like, yes, I can feel everything. But everything that happens is just like a threat. Maybe your baby could be hurt. And so the world feels too near and too painful. So I'll read a couple poems from that. I'll read a non-downer one first, because I've read a lot of death. So here's one that's not horribly depressing, and it's called Fledgling. I scare away the rabbits, stripping the strawberries in the garden, ripened ovaries reddening their mouths. You take down the hanging basket and show it to our son, a nest, secret as a heart, throbbing between flowers. Look, but don't touch, you instruct our son, who has already begun to reach for the black globes of the new bird's eyes, wanting to touch the world, to know it. Disappointed, you say, common house finch, as if even banal miracles aren't still pink and blind and heaving with life. When the cat your ex-wife gave you died, I was grateful. I'd never seen a man grieve like that for an animal. I held you like a victory, embarrassed and relieved that this was how you loved, to the bone of you, to the meat. And we want the stricken pleasure of intimacy, so we risk it. We do. Every day we take down the basket and prove it to our son, just to look at its rawness, its tenderness, its almost flying. And so this one is more about those dangers of the world feeling very close. There was one day, I teach at K-State, and there was one day we arrived and there were numerous cop cars outside the building, and the lights were flashing, but there were no sirens. And I went down, and the students were all like, "What's going on?" I was like, "I don't know." And so they immediately started telling me what they did in active shooter drills in their schools. And we made a plan of action for our classroom because we don't have a plan of action, like in place the way high schools do. And so this poem sort of starts from that moment. In the news around that time too, there was a discussion of arming teachers for such cases, and I was like, I can't shoot anybody, I'm not killing anybody, I'm running. And so those sorts of things were part of this poem, and I just say it was a student in the poem, but shout out to Lucas Burnt, my student, who appears in the middle of the poem, and who offered to do what I couldn't do. Self-portrait as milk hair in active shooter alert. We plan our escape from our basement classroom. My students share their memories of school shooter drills, and I share what the police advise. Run. Trees blush and undress, but the scratching outside our window is not the dead we fear to be. Today in the news, I read rediscovered stories collected by Irish school children of medicine and hags who became rabbits to lap milk from cows, though I don't know why a witch would need to, why she couldn't say, I'm a mother like you, and hold her own cream in her cupped palm for a cow's rough time, and ask for the kindness returned. The moon occults the stars in Taurus, and my son performs his sadness over an otter that died at the zoo. He blinks slow and sniffles back octaves of salt. I don't know where he learned to do this, to be an understudy to the keening of trees planted too close to houses. I read him Runaway Bunny and say I would chase him through all his transformations, be the gardener to his crocus, the wind to his sailing ship, the tightrope walker when he learns the trapeze, so we can both be creatures of air. One student says we can use him as a stool to climb from the window well to the lawn. I'm glad someone wants to die for the rest of us. I don't want to give my son a hero for a mother. I want to go home to him. I want him to lose me after years of hugs and arguments and medically acceptable suffering. And I would take this student's offering and leap from his back like the milk hair a farmer shot in an Irish story, and then went to confront his neighbor for stealing, only to find her in bed, human again, holding her bleeding head. The farmer warned her thirsty tongue, though he knew, as everyone did, that bullets won't kill witches. I will not die for these students or kill for them. I would draw on whiskers and pull myself from this concrete burrow, dodge cracks in the air, aim for the gentle corrections of the trees' shadows, my body small enough for hiding, my ears so large they can hear my name in my son's prayer, red as the fear that will keep me on earth, black as blood and moonlight, in the fur that twitches back to skin again, my son's arms safely around my neck, his milk teeth and bubblegum cheeks, breathing, breathing, oh, still alive. And my last poem, so maybe you're like, don't send my kid to her class, she's running. I think we're all supposed to. It's what the police advised in the Alice training. So the last poem I'll read is a non-downer. It's called Love Poem Without a Drop of Hyperbole in It. And I spent a long time trying to write a love poem that didn't suck. I was just so much better at elegies. But Oscar Wilde said, without exaggeration, there can be no love. And I think that's a little bit true. Like when you meet that person, you're like, but like, isn't the sky blue today? Like, am I not a puzzle piece interlocking with you right now? Like all of the cliches just feel true. And I think, love does sort of exaggerate that person. That's part of the beautiful chemical experience of it all. I don't have a good origin story for this poem, other than I just want to read you something that isn't sad. So here's my love poem without a drop of hyperbole in it. I love you like ladybugs love windowsills. Love you like sperm whales love squid. There's no depth I wouldn't follow you through. I love you like the pawns in chess love aristocratic horses. I'll throw myself in front of a bishop or a queen for you, even a sentient castle. My love is crazy like that. I like that sweet little hothouse mouth you have. I like to kiss you with tongue, with gusto, with socks still on. I love you like a vulture loves the careless deer at the roadside. I want to get all up in you. I love you like Isis loved Osiris, but her devotion came up a few inches short. I trained my breath and learned to read sonar until I retrieved every lost blood vessel of you. I swear this love is ungodly, not an ounce of suffering in it. Like salmon and its upstream itch, I'll dodge grizzlies for you. Like hawks and skyscraper rooftops, I'll keep coming back. Maddened, a little hopeless, embarrassingly in love. And that's why I'm on the couch, kissing pictures on my phone, instead of calling you in from the kitchen, where you are undoubtedly making dinner too spicy. But when you hold the spoon to my lips and ask if it's ready, I'll say it is, always, but never, there is never enough. Thank you.
So we have maybe a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. Does anybody have any questions for the doctor? I do.
How long did it take for you to put out one of those books?
I think the dirty secret is that I'm actually a quitter. Like people ask sometimes, is a poem finished or abandoned? And I definitely abandon. I'm like, I do everything I can for a poem, and then I'm like, all right, get out there, get a job. I'm not doing your laundry anymore. Like I give each piece what I can based on where I'm at and what I have capable of giving it, and then I kick it out. Sometimes I think, like this book was written, I guess you could say living in my car was a gift of time. Not having a job did lead to writing a lot more poems, though I don't recommend that as a way to write a book. Having an apartment and an electric bill is also awesome. But also now as a mom and no full-time job and all those other things, I'm much slower. So yeah, homelessness helped me write fast. It's not recommended.
I get that.
So I think also it's changes for me, but I think about, I think my average is about 5 years.
Okay. Well, then I'm okay. I'm all right? It hasn't been 5 years since my last one, so I'm good, right?
Yeah, totally.
Are there any other questions?
Who was the poet you had that changed things for you, that drew you away from novel writing?
It was Sharon Olds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then I felt less alone. But then I read like John Donne, and I was like, but this dead guy gets me, so it's, I think lots of people just feeling that kinship of like, you can speak across death, you can, and not like in a way to be immortal, but in a way to, how nice that intimacy can still happen, even with strangers, even with the dead, that you can still feel like somebody has lived their life like you, or is living their life like you, or in a way where you recognize it. Because sometimes in culture, I don't see a reflection of myself in lots of cultural media and stuff. And so poems, maybe because of the quietness and the intimacy and the feeling of something shared, helps me feel less alone.
Any other question?
Have you wrote any more poems about your son besides the one that is looking at the bird's nest?
Yeah, lots. And I worry, I'm to that age too, because when he used to say things when he was super little, I wasn't worried about embarrassing him or exposing something that he didn't want other people to know. But at the same time, I'm trying to understand how to be a mom and how to be, if not good at it, at least not suck at it. And so, yeah, the new book has my dead mom in it, because that's what I do. But it also has like all these struggles of like being a mom, and how like being a mom is the best sort of terror, but it also is like quite hard, and none of the things I thought to prepare for are things that I've encountered. And
How old is he?
he's 5.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. But I mean, lately I've been writing about empathy, and the last thing I think I wrote about him was about empathy, because he said that the sad was so big and he couldn't get it all out, and he was sobbing and pulling at his pajamas because he couldn't get the sadness out. And what do you do with a kid who has a big sad? But I felt it would dishonor his sadness to empathize too much. It is my job to be safe, not to feel the same thing as him, and to protect him. I don't think I reflect him. And so I just held him until he was okay, rather than try and make it all better. He just needed to get the sad out. And so like really struggling with what do you do? Like to see your heart is walking around outside your body, and that's so painful, and you can't protect them. And in fact, you kind of in some ways shouldn't, because they have to learn how to deal with their emotions. They have to learn how to deal with other people in the world. And like, how do you safely monitor those boundaries where you're letting them experience, but you're still letting them be safe and have a safe place in you? Yeah, so that was a poem. But like, I write about it a lot. I'm really trying to figure out how to be in the world myself sometimes, I feel. And then I have this other person who is this most important part of me that I love like crazy, who suffers and struggles and has the big sad and has a tenderness for animals, and I write about all of that too.
It's such a great answer.
One more question.
One more question? Anybody? No? Are we done? Yeah? Okay. So Jason has, oh, let's give it up for Traci.
All right, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Arts and Humanities and Spark, for partnering on this event. I love you. And I hope to see all of you here next week when we have Melissa Lozada Oliva. And it's going to be a multimedia presentation, so brace yourselves. It's going to be good. So, see you at Spark right after this.